You know, when we think about history, we usually picture the big, dramatic events, the stormed castles, the overthrown kings. But what about the ideas that actually power those events? That's what we're digging into today, one of the most explosive ideas ever written and how it connected to one of the most chaotic moments in all of history, the French Revolution.
So here's the big question. Did one single book, Jean-Jacques Rousseau's The Social Contract, actually cause the French Revolution? Well, the simple answer is no, of course not. But the real story, how an idea can become the fuel for an absolute inferno, that's way more fascinating. So let's break down how it all went down.
Okay, so first things first, you always need a spark. And for the French Revolution, that spark was a totally new, completely radical way of thinking about where political power even comes from. And it all revolved around this one single concept from Rousseau.
And that concept is the general will. Now, you have to remember, before Rousseau, power was pretty simple. It came from God or from tradition. A king was the king because, well, God said so. End of story. But Rousseau comes along and just flips that whole script on its head. He argued that the only real legitimate power is the power that the people, all the people, collectively agree to. Sovereignty, he said, doesn't belong to a king. It belongs to us.
I mean, look at this. This is a complete 180. You're going from a system where power is handed down from on high, from heaven, to one where it rises up from the ground, from the people themselves. This isn't just some small little tweak to the system. This is a philosophical earthquake that just shatters the very foundation of the old world.
But an idea is just an idea, right? For a spark to actually start a fire, it needs to land on something flammable. Let me tell you, 18th century France was the perfect tinderbox, just waiting for a match.
So how did a complex philosophy like this even get out to the masses? Well, it spread through the social media of the day. First, you have the salons and the books, where all the educated folks were reading it. Then, it gets picked up by the rising middle class, the bourgeoisie, who felt totally boxed in by the old system. And finally, these huge ideas get simplified, turned into slogans, and spread person to person right there in the streets.
And people were ready to listen, because France was an absolute mess. The government was broke, people were literally starving because they couldn't afford bread. And the tax system, it was a sick joke where the poorest people paid for everything and the rich paid basically nothing. The whole system was rotten to the core, and everybody knew it. They just needed someone to give them a good reason why it was okay to burn it all down.
And that is exactly where Rousseau becomes so incredibly important. He didn't just tell people they had a right to be angry. He gave them a logical, philosophical permission slip to actually do something about it.
The logic is actually super simple, but it's devastating. It starts with this premise that's starting to spread like wildfire. Real, true power can only come from the consent of the people. Okay, so if you accept that,
and the conclusion is just unavoidable, isn't it? The entire French monarchy, which ruled by divine right, and definitely not by the people's consent, was fundamentally illegitimate. It wasn't just a bad government. In their eyes, it was a fraud.
And that right there, that's the real game changer. Rousseau's logic completely transformed what it meant to rebel. It was no longer treason against a king chosen by God. No, it was now a moral and political right, maybe even a duty, to tear down an illegitimate system and take back the power that was yours all along.
But there's another piece to this puzzle, and it's a really dangerous one. Rousseau's idea was powerful for sure, but it was also vague. And that vagueness, that ambiguity, acted like a massive amplifier for the chaos of the revolution.
I mean, think about it. What exactly is the general will? How do you measure it? Who gets to say what it is? Rousseau never really gave a clear answer. He left it abstract. And that meant that the true will of the people had to be fought over and decided in the heat of political battle. And that opened the door to some serious conflict.
This ambiguity was really a double-edged sword. On one side, it was incredibly powerful. It allowed everyone, from the moderate reformers to the most extreme radicals, to claim they were fighting for the general will. It was a banner everyone could rally behind. But on the other side, it led to a deadly question. Who truly speaks for the people? Every faction started claiming they were the true voice, and they began to justify silencing, arresting, and even executing their rivals as enemies of the people.
So let's pull all these threads together. Let's go back and answer that first question. What role did this one idea, this one book, really play in all this? Look, Even if it wasn't the direct cause, Rousseau's idea was absolutely essential. First, it gave everyone a completely new political language to use. Second, it handed them the moral justification they needed to tear the old world down. And third, its vagueness acted as a catalyst, a chemical agent that let different groups hijack the term and push the revolution in more and more extreme directions. So really, this is the absolute best way to think about it. Rousseau didn't march into France and light the match that started the revolution. The country was already a giant pile of dry wood, just waiting for a spark. What he did was supply the ideological fuel, gallons and gallons of it. And when that fuel finally met the tinder of a collapsing society, the explosion was inevitable.
And that kind of leaves us with one last thing to think about. We've just seen how a single abstract idea about who's in charge could completely reshape a country. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? In our own time, with so much change happening so fast, what are the big, powerful ideas shaping our world? What's the ideological fuel of our society today?